Could we please start from Dean Elfer to continue from where we left, and then I would request Adam to give his point of view. Moshe, I just quoted you that to have a moment of silence, but everybody's of the view if you have it after lunch, we'll fall asleep, so we're just going to have it later. So if we can just have your views on it.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for having us here. I'm very honored to be here. I'd like to share a little bit about the initiative which we started. Give a bit of an introduction to myself. So I'm the founder of EMG Group, which is a sustainability consultancy headquartered in the Netherlands. But we do work very internationally. Yes, sorry. So I run a sustainability consultancy, which I started 12 years ago in the Netherlands. And we've worked a lot in parts of the world where Islamic values are very core to the corporate culture, such as in the Middle East, Southeast Asia, Central Asia, North Africa. And we've done a lot of research as well among about 200 companies into what drives sustainability within these organizations. And we recognized great potential of Islamic values such as peace, compassion, tolerance, justice, human dignity, environmental stewardship, as being very compatible with the values of corporate social responsibility and sustainable development. And yet, when it comes to reporting on sustainability, we really realize that this isn't as commonly practiced as it is in other parts of the world. Which is why we really thought about perhaps creating a reporting framework which builds directly on the opportunity of Islamic values, therefore being relevant, being practical for organizations. In a quarter of the world's countries, the opportunity is phenomenal. So fast forward, we started an independent not-for-profit organization. We're very honored to have Mohammed Amersi as one of our trustees. And in just 1 year, we've got members in more than 50 countries. It's been endorsed by the United Nations Global Compact. It's been endorsed by the OIC, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, which is sort of the Islamic United Nations, if you like. And we recently had our first roundtable discussion at the COP22, the United Nations Climate Change Conference in Marrakesh. So we really see an opportunity there in building on a framework or taking a systemic approach to implementing sustainability. Every sustainability expert in the world will agree, if we want to deliver on the Sustainable Development Goals, as has been emphasized this morning, we need a systemic approach. And here we have a system, if you like, a set of values that is shared by a quarter of the world's people. So if we can create out of that, with those values at the foundation, protocols, standards, tools for businesses to use, we feel we have a great opportunity to deliver on the Sustainable Development Goals from an Islamic perspective. And it's not just because these are Islamic values, doesn't make them any less central to other faiths. But here is an opportunity we believe can make an incredible contribution towards businesses being, creating or working towards a sustainable, inclusive global economy, focused on from the economic side, but also socially and environmentally. So we welcome everyone to who is potentially interested to speak with us and to see how we can work together in realizing this. And I'm very keen to follow the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think there's a big opportunity, and I think we should sit together and explore. You're more than welcome to discuss it with any one of us, including any of the executive member, but you are already working with Mr. Amersi, so it'll be very good to take this forward.
He's in Dubai.
You're in Dubai, so there it is. Sorry, sir, please.
Thank you.
Education for Employment is one of the organizations I've been involved with for a very long time, and we just saw Ron Bruder as well giving a speech on this. Please. So.
Good afternoon. My name is Agustin Perez Villaplana. I'm the Director of Operation and Program for Education for Employment Foundation. I've just been there 15 months because I worked 28 years in Citibank previously. And I'm mentioning that because as an operations, technology, and program manager, I do apologize in case you feel that I'm trying to land the plane a little bit fast, a little bit quick, because I'm pretty much implementation oriented. So that's my intention, is really to put in place something, or at least to propose something which might go quick. Today, Education for Employment has been placing in market about 10,000 people and have been training 37,000 young disadvantaged people. The mission of EFE, Education for Employment, is precisely to place young disadvantaged people in jobs after providing them soft skill training as well as technical training, which are oriented to the market requirement. Today we're getting funds from private companies as well as from the US government. We have been running for the last 10 years. So I think we have a business card that can show tangible results and some level of success. So education is a critical point, and I think we are addressing that in the right way. So hopefully, Raza, I will try to propose something concrete by July 31st. That's the intention. Okay?
Will be very good. Thank you. While we are on the subject, I wanted to ask Rajiv Joshi, who's here from B Team. We have had Jochen Zeist here earlier, who's on the board of B Team or one of the founders. Mo is on the board of B Team as well. So we wanted to know that with our association, with all of you, yourself, your time put in, what is it that we can do to ensure that B Team is supported and helped and is one of the initiatives that GSN supports?
Thank you, Raza. I don't know if the volume is automatic.
On the right-hand side, there is a right top button.
Thank you very much. So my name is Rajiv, and I'm with the B Team, which brings together some of the world's most iconic business and civil society leaders, so former heads of state like Mary Robinson and Gru Brundtland, but also business leaders like Ratan Tata and Richard Branson and others who believe that it's time for business to play a fundamentally different role in society. And we're trying to grow and galvanize a movement of business leaders who are leading by example in their own companies, but also using their voice and their influence to stand up with a moral voice on issues that are of importance in the moments that matter most. And we've selected 3 core issues at the B Team that we're focusing on. The idea is to galvanize and accelerate existing efforts and not to start any new efforts. The first is on climate change, where we were very active on helping with the climate agreement in Paris, and it's called Net Zero by 2050. The second is on the issue of governance and transparency, which Mo Ibrahim is with Ngozi Conjuela and others helping to drive, which is more focused on issues around illicit flows of capital, open governance, open contracting, the space for civil society to organize and express itself. But the third initiative, which is part of the reason that I was keen to be here and why Jochen and I have been as part of the last 4 out of 5 convenings, I believe, is an initiative called 100% Human at Work. And please excuse me for being on the phone. Earlier, we're actually recruiting someone full-time to dedicate their effort to this work. And so we're interviewing today, the only day we could get all of us on the phone, for someone who can dedicate their time to this 100% Human at Work initiative. And part of that initiative includes looking at the fact that 40% of the world's workforce are part of what we call the hidden workforce. And it really looks at the issue of modern day slavery. How do you get companies to start addressing the informal sector and get increasingly through their value chains, move people into the formal sector where they have rights, where they have accountability, they're able to hold their employees accountable for their rights, where they're seen and not just invisible, and where their dignity can be protected. So we're interested in collaborating on a number of the initiatives that we're hearing here, potentially bringing visibility to those initiatives, by getting some business leaders to also amplify. And our next stage, tomorrow I'm flying to Nairobi, where we're with one of our business leaders is a CEO of Safaricom in Kenya, who together with Mo is helping create a B team in Africa, a chapter of business leaders in Africa, which we're also doing in China and then in Latin America. As we create this corporate bench of progressive business leaders who share these attitudes and beliefs, how do we get them to participate in these initiatives?
So do you feel that the business chapter we have, B team should be actively involved in our business chapter?
Yeah, absolutely, and would be happily involved in that.
So what can you do to ensure that B team members are actually committed? Are they committed at the top level personally, or is just one of the corporate?
I mean, Jochen is personally.
It's a nice thing for them to do. It's a need for them to do.
I think most of the company. I mean, if you take Unilever for example, they have a deep commitment to all the way through the value chains, through working with smallholder farmers. If you take Kering, for example, this is a big focus for them. Decent work is, if you look at their 2015 sustainability strategy.
How many companies are there part of the B team?
There's around 20 companies in the B team.
Why it's so little?
Because what we've tried to do is take some of the world's most progressive companies, not to build a global compact where you can only move at the speed of the slowest common denominator, but to have a smaller subset of companies that can move with agility and rapidly respond.
Is the limitation related to some sort of funding they have to do to be a part of it?
No, it's not pay to play. We don't believe in that model. We have a set of 10 challenges that companies need to sign up to. And it came from 1,200 self-organizing events that were happening from entrepreneurs in boardrooms around the world and with sustainability experts to look at what are the biggest barriers preventing business from driving social, environmental, and economic benefit. So those challenges, some of them have been described by others in the room, but they kind of speak to things like true accounting. Business is not accounting for the full cost of its activities. So how do we get the measurement right in terms of environmental and social profit and loss? It speaks to things like redefining reward systems so that executive compensation is tied to the social and environmental performance, which some of our companies like Kering and Salesforce have adopted. It speaks to things like ensuring dignity and fairness, ensuring that the Ruggie principles on business and human rights are actually being embedded at the grassroots level of a company. So we have these 10 challenges that all of the business leaders have to sign up to, and then we ask them to join initiatives which are designed as multi-stakeholder projects to work with the communities around these issues. So we don't start those as new initiatives. So just to finish, a very good example is to get the G20 to adopt what we call principles of beneficial ownership transparency. We worked with Transparency International and Global Witness and many others that were working on this issue where essentially companies were extracting natural resources through anonymous shell companies, taking resources from poorer countries without paying any taxation because of the existence of these shell companies. And it was also being used for crime, and if you look at human trafficking, shell companies are one of the vehicles that are used by trafficking groups. So we focus on that leverage point and built the business case, set out the clear and compelling business case for why we should not have anonymous shell companies, and wrote to all of the G20 leaders. And for the first time in its history, the G20 passed principles on beneficial ownership transparency. The UK then went even further and put in place a registry that requires companies to put that information public. And we got 3 companies to publicly publish their corporate ownership data on that website, and launched a website in Panama to get companies around the world to do the same thing. So that starts to create a norm shift around how companies actually share data with regard to the issue of illicit flows of capital, which undermines sustainable development.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So if we could request Adam, and then we will request Bishop Alistair to give a summary of the day before we ask John and Hazel. John will start with summarizing the outcomes of last year, so he's going to take us through a 10-minute presentation on that, and then continue with telling us about Podio before we call it a day. So Adam, if you can briefly tell us what you had in mind.
I am honored to be here and really humbled by the mission and the fellowship and collegiality that I see here. The historian Arnold Toynbee in 1934 published a book, A Study of History, and he studied the civilizations throughout history and identified some 20-odd civilizations. And he said civilizations encounter periodic challenges to them, to their very existence. And if they are to survive, it is because a creative minority rises to the challenge and sees a new way. And I view this group here as such a creative minority within, its province. Einstein said that the world we have is the result of the thinking, and that if you want to change the world, you have to change the thinking. And I think one way to frame the mission of GSN, instead of things that we can do, is to change the thinking of others so that they, in fact, do that. The visionary Buckminster Fuller said, you get nowhere by trying to fight things. And I want to tell you as an outsider, I've heard that metaphor used a number of times here. Fighting a war, a weapon, fighting poverty, fighting slavery. And since our goal is to change the thinking of people, I would urge you to consider that these metaphors are not helpful. The notion of fighting sets up an adversarial relationship and does not invite the other to change his thinking, which is what our goal is. And I believe, and I don't have the time today, but I will write, I know we're going to have an organ through which we can disseminate our ideas among the group, and I will share with you my ideas of, instead of fighting slavery, of displacing it. This notion of displacing. And I want to conclude, and I have so much to say, I could talk for hours, but I want to conclude. I know that one of the goals is to raise awareness and to measure progress, and I think there's a way to do both. You may recall the Ice Bucket Challenge from last year. That raised $128 million. $128 million for ALS. Now that's a worthy cause, but I want to tell you, we here know about slavery, but a lot of the world doesn't. I took an Uber to the airport in coming here from New York, and I said, I was very excited. I said, I'm going to Rome, to the Vatican, to discuss taking steps to ending slavery. And the driver was puzzled, and he said, slavery, does that still exist? And I said, well, yes, it does. And he said, but it's against the law, isn't it? Isn't it illegal? And in his mind, it didn't exist because it's illegal. And I said, yes, worldwide. And he said, well, of course that's true outside the U.S. And I said, no, it's also true in the U.S. And so I think one way to raise awareness, raise money, and to measure the impact is to have that kind of a challenge. And I know we're talking about the End Slavery Day in May. I want to jump on board. I know you're talking about initiatives. I'm going to jump on board this and get people excited about raising money, and then we'll have our metric. You want to find out progress? Well, raising money is one such thing. And the last thing is, ending slavery is down the road, and we might want to have interim goals that people can get excited about in the meantime. I don't mean us, because we're excited, but I mean the world. So, anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Adam. It was really very inspiring and very helpful. Really appreciate your help and input. Thanks. We can request Bishop Alistair to summarize the day.
Well, thank you, all of you. This won't be a comprehensive summary. I'm just going to give you some headlines. I want to start with the perspective that Adam's introduced by using the word displacement. And picking up, Jeffrey talked about we're fighting a war. And I think it's very important that we recognize that they're both elements of what we're about. If, probably like Jeffrey, like me, you work with victims, then you haven't got the time or luxury in stopping the crime to do the therapy with the criminal. They're both important, But there's an urgency, as Lisa's pictures show, where there's got to be some pushback. I take the point fighting might be an overstrong language, but there's got to be some pushback and some energy, as well as Adam's wisdom about changing thinking and values and mindset. And we've got to operate in both of those areas, because to use the military language, we are losing the battle at the moment. Slavery is increasing as we speak. It's a really successful smart business model. It plays on the fact there are more and more vulnerable people around whose aspirations are massive because they can see on a phone what the rest of the world's got, and they're easily conned. We've got to push back and stop and make the tide of the battle go the other way. Charlotte reminded us that you use the word fear. There's a lot of anxiety about it, not just in people who are suffering from slavery or the effects of climate change, but there's lots of fear in the minds of those who have the levers of power. And that's a very important perspective for us to think about as we try to make a pitch into governments, to business, whatever it is. There's fear, people need help. I just want to remind us, first of all, some of our language. And we were given the language of inclusive growth. And that's a very powerful phrase for us, because we model that inclusivity that we were told governments need to work with civil society, other kinds of partners, faith groups. And we want to model that inclusivity to grow a movement. I think that's a very important phrase for us to go away with about inclusive growth. Mohammed spoke about our values. And our values are faith-based. Some of us have a faith with a formal name. Others of us have a faith that's in our heart that comes to the surface when we're confronted with these issues. And our kind of values are about convening, raising awareness, creating an agenda for action. Those values unite all of us, and we want to share those values of convening, being in each other's space creatively, raising awareness of the issue, and agendas for action. Nili talked about slow growth, which was a good challenge for us. And she talked about the answer is capital and innovation. Elliot talked about our capital is relational and intellectual, but I think the key is this word innovation. How are we not just going to hear each other's stories, aspirations, possibilities, but help them develop, help new things through our synergies occur to people, new possibilities like Rani's contacts with people. How are we going to help things develop so that innovation's part of our DNA, as well as the handling of our relational and intellectual capital? There's been quite a lot of talk about remodeling leadership and what leadership looks like. And I feel very passionately, as many of you know, that what we're doing here is modeling a kind of leadership, which is a trust-based fellowship from which things happen. And I think we need to be proud of that. We need to be ambassadors. And it's what we want to replicate if we start other GSN groups around the world. Patrick talked about this paradox that there's never been such great interconnectivity of the human family, and yet we can't get a message across. So we heard Adam's story about the taxi driver. People don't know about these issues, or at least choose not to open their eyes and see them, because we've all got other priorities. And a lot of the stuff with the media and others is how do we open people's eyes to see what is there, and for the faith and the values to rise in their hearts. The media gives us great potential, and Jeffrey's film is a good example, or Lisa's book in the exhibition in Budapest. How can we build on that? Because it's the pictures and the kind of narratives that people connect with, not the statistics. And that's why the media thrust is so important, I think. Just a couple of other observations. In terms of future development, it's really exciting about the chapter in Pakistan. And I want to say to everybody here, who else is going to go and form a chapter somewhere? And it might be good to have some aspirations posted among us and challenging us to do that. Mohammed talked about the future of the corporation. I think what we're doing is modelling how people can work together in a kind of business. We're creating a business here. And I hope we can be in dialogue with that more formal academic project to contribute to it as well as learn from it. We've heard some exciting things about the measurement of business performance, important things about, I think, July the 30th, the day that we're challenged to support. Something I want to add that I meant to say earlier, I was at this event in Istanbul 2 weeks ago with the Archbishop and Patriarch Bartholomew, and we had somebody from the UN who's one of their lead people on slavery, and he said that in 2019 the UN are going to review Goal 8. And I think we need to start preparing for our contribution to a review of where we're getting to with Goal 8 under the UN banner in 2019. Just two last observations. I love the way there's an easy use of the word we. People who've been here 10 minutes say we. We should be thankful for that. And we should be proud that we can create a space where people pitch up and say we're together. We need to look now at how we're going to get things going in the countries and areas, and how we're going to develop these 5 or 6 now with the academic world being identified as important. How are we going to get some real traction now, not in these big meetings, but in targeted groups, headed up by some of the people who spoke this morning, I suspect, who can really drive some serious work in each of those major areas, which can contribute to the larger meetings that we have. The only other thing we haven't really mentioned under government is the thing about legislation. And Bishop Sanchez mentioned about the Nordic model. There's a lot more work we can facilitate about legislative change, I think, with our contacts and the areas we work in. And we perhaps need to not let that slip off the agenda. But I think we are a brand, we are a movement, we are an ethos, and great things lie before us if we can get the right structures, energy used creatively, and expand to involve others in the we-ness of what we're about. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. If I could request, or maybe Moshe could lead the couple of minutes of quietness, and then we can move on with John giving us a presentation after that. So, Moshe.
Just to rephrase, it's not to lead, but maybe we can together. It's just a suggestion. I think some of us believe in the power of prayer, or the power of meditation, or just simply the power of silence. And if we can just take a few moments in silence, first to be grateful to our hosts, to be grateful to the organizers, to be grateful for being here together at this moment, here and now, to be grateful for the magic that we are co-creating together, to be grateful for the luxury that we have of being the ones here and to be able to talk about what we really want to do, and perhaps to internalize a lot of what we heard and to really ask ourselves, how can I leave today more inspired and really more committed than before I entered this room today? No matter how much we've been doing already, we all know that's fantastic, but that's not enough. So just in a moment of silence, internalize what we heard from all the great people surrounding us, and how do we leave today more committed to really make a difference?